I do have one thing, though, that we'd like to do, and that would be if Lindy McNulty quickly come up here.
Would like to make a presentation to the mayor of his article in Carroll Magazine.
Oh my goodness. Thank you so
That is nice. Beautiful. There you go.
much. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Wow.
What a surprise. That is a terrific thing. They were trying to sell me one of these for $150.
You can
Thank you very much.
Okay, just quickly, we have two of our commissioners here, Commissioner Frazier and Commissioner Roush. Okay, that's good. And Senator Brinkley, down at the end down there. Mike McMillan, head of Carroll County Chamber. Neil Rupp, Mayor of New Windsor. Okay. We have Angelo Zambetti, Diane Foster from City of Taneytown, our two new incumbents that just were reelected. Our city manager, Henry Hine. And of course, our mayor. It is my. we can put his picture up if you'd like that. This is quite an honor today to have the congressman up here, and I'm just going to give you a short bio, and then please feel free. It's a very relaxed atmosphere, as he'll find out, and we even laugh sometimes. So we want questions, from the audience also. Andrew Harris, MD, has spent a lifetime serving his neighbors and country and community, whether it's as a physician at Johns Hopkins, as a veteran of the Naval Reserve, as a hardworking state senator, and now a congressman. He's made his life serving others. He's dedicated to making every constituent in the 1st Congressional District receive the highest quality assistance and well represents in the halls of Congress. He's a husband to Cookie, his wife, over 30 years. And he has 5 children. Busy man. And he found his calling studying medicine at Johns Hopkins, where he graduated near the top of his class and continued to practice as an anesthesiologist for over 3 decades. He volunteered and later established and commanded the Johns Hopkins Medical Naval Reserve Primus Unit P0605C. Is that correct? Okay. He's a political neophyte. We have a few of those in here also, I think. And he decided to run for the Maryland State Senate in '98, and after winning an impressive margin, he continued to serve as a physician, epitomizing our founding fathers' belief in part-time citizen legislator. His innovative thinking and devotion to efficient government and dedication to his constituents earned him the Hero of the Taxpayer Award from the Maryland Taxpayers Association in 2008. He began serving as a congressman from the beautiful, of course, 1st District of Maryland in 2011. He currently serves on the Appropriation Committee and enjoys spending his time on the Bay with his family and repairing old cars with his son, Congressman Andy Harris. Oh.
Before we hand the mic to the congressman, I just want to let everyone know how happy I am and how honored I am to have Congressman Harris here in his westernmost municipality. How proud are we to be in District 1, our district that stretches from Taneytown to Pocomoke City, to the Virginia line, to the Atlantic Ocean, and to the Monocacy River. So thank you very much for being with us, Congressman. I want to give you a little pin from Taneytown and thank you for it, so you remember where we are. And if you ever up this way, please contact me. I'd love to chat with you anytime. Glad to have you here.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you very, very much. And gosh, it is a real pleasure to be here with you. As you know, with the redistricting, I traded Carroll County for Anne Arundel County. I think I got the better part of the deal. But the district does run here. This really is the very northwest tip. And as I say, because you know, some of you may not know where Pocomoke is, but everybody knows where Ocean City is. It runs all the way from here to Ocean City, the largest district in Maryland. And of course, I do border 3 states now because I have border Pennsylvania, I also border Delaware, also border, of course, Virginia in the southern portion of the district. Look, it is. I'm going to spend only about 10 minutes going over just showing you just pictorially going over what the problem is. And I'll just cut to the chase. The problem is the debt. The federal debt's the problem. It is that Washington does not do what every other jurisdiction in the country does, which is balance its budget. And hasn't done it for years. And as you can figure out in your household or your business, if you don't balance your budget for years, sooner or later it causes a real problem. And I think we're at that point. So let me show you a few pictures of that, and then I'm just going to open it up to. I want to hear from you. Okay, I'm here to hear from you, and we can take the you know, the question and answer whatever direction you want to go. So first of all, I'm gonna talk through these in case you can't see. Oop. All right, hold on. First, we got to figure out the technology here. Okay. This is the federal. Okay. We really do have a technology problem here. All right. You want to speed me up there. Okay, this is the federal debt. This is a 100-year snapshot of the country, of the federal debt, with us about 2/3 way through here. So it shows the federal debt over the last 70 years and then projected over the next 30. And it always shows the federal debt as a percent of the gross domestic product. So the analogy is, you know, if you go to a bank to get a loan, everything is expressed, what you can afford is expressed in terms of what your income is. I mean, that's the bottom line. Same thing. The GDP, of course, the entire output of the country, and again, this is the federal debt as a percent of GDP. As you can see, in the last 70 years, the real spike in our federal debt was World War II, where we were fighting, where literally 90% of the federal budget went to the Defense Department. 90% of the federal budget. A lot of that money borrowed. We know war bonds, a lot of the money borrowed, and there is one significant difference here. The money was borrowed actually internally. It was people lending the government money, individuals mostly. Whereas, of course, now it's a different picture. We have international governments own about half our debt. Obviously, other entities lend as well. And we also have now the Social Security and Medicare internal debt that we didn't have back then. So if you look at the debt as percent of GDP, it was our total debt was about the same as GDP, and then you see it fall. You know, there's a little blip for the Korean War, but then it falls, and then in 1980, and most people don't realize this, but when President Reagan took office, I mean, what he did 2 things. The economy was bad, as you remember, so he cut tax rates in order to promote future growth, and then he increased defense spending to win the Cold War. So we had again a recession and a defense buildup, okay? And the result of that normally is an increase in debt, and it increased, but it's still pretty low. And then it started to get paid off, and then you had September 11th 10 years ago. And again, you had a recession, small recession, big defense buildup, and then of course in 2008 the big recession occurred, and you started to incur a lot of debt. The worrisome thing is not that happened, because in the past it's happened, we paid it down. But if we don't change any federal policy, this is the projection, and this is, again, this is OMB and CBO. This is the President's budget office, and the bipartisan congressional office says this is what happens to the federal debt in the future. Now, this is assuming no more wars. This doesn't assume recession. This assumes constant growth of the economy, but even greater growth in spending. And of course, as you also realize, as the CBO says in their assessment of this, and this, by the way, if you continue out to 2070, goes to 700% of GDP. But as they tell you, That's all mythical because after a while, people stop lending you money, right? It's the same thing you have. If your income is constant and you just keep going to get more loans, sooner or later somebody says, "I'm sorry, if you can't increase the credit card anymore." And in fact, historically, what's of interest is that usually is at about 100% of GDP. So if you look at what happened to Greece, you look at what happened to Italy, or the European countries that have debt issues now, when they get to 100% of GDP, their debt, that's when people stop lending the money. And then that spirals out of control. Ladies and gentlemen, we are at 100% of debt. The bottom line is we're at it. We passed it about, it was about 14 months ago. We passed 100% debt to GDP ratio. So we're already at the point where our only good fortune is, we are the best looking house in a very bad neighborhood. I mean, that's the bottom line. So that's the only thing that's saving us right now. All right. So we have, what this says the total spending in last fiscal year 2012, was $3.54 trillion. So it's $3.54 trillion. We ran a deficit of about $1 trillion. So we took in 2.5, spent about 3.5, and this is where this is the kind of the pie chart of where we spent it. But the two important things. One is that everything is kind of this reddish color is what we have called autopilot spending, or automatic spending. This is spending that you get under current law. If you turn 65 and you apply for Social Security, you get it, and the government has to send you a check. If you're on Medicare and you get sick, the government has to pay the bill. If you get unemployed and you go on unemployment, the government has to send the check. So this is all automatic spending. Obviously, so the biggest chunk, Social Security, almost $750 billion. Medicare is now close to close to $500 billion. Medicaid, one of the most rapidly growing parts of the budget, about $250 billion. Interest on the debt, $220 billion a year, larger than most federal departments, just the interest on the debt. And the problem is, for those of you who have an accounting or business background, is you know that our interest rates are at historic lows. We are paying about 1.7% on our debt, federal debt. That's less than half historically of what we pay on the federal debt, because of course the Fed has been keeping interest rates artificially low by, we used to say printing money, but you don't need to print it anymore because it's created on a computer now. I mean, it's just electrons now. It's not even paper. But that's approaching $250 billion. And if you just went to traditional interest rates, so if the federal government paying about 4% on its long-term debt, that would go to over $500 billion. I mean, just by interest rates returning to normal. So that's a real problem coming up. But what's interesting is some people say, well, all we need to do is we need to, cut foreign aid. Foreign aid, and I'm going to ask actually when I go back, ask Kevin to put a sliver. Foreign aid, if you put it on here, would be a tiny sliver here. It's about now. Only in Washington, you say 34 billion is tiny. But that's the total foreign aid budget, and so the foreign aid budget would literally be, a tiny, tiny sliver, nowhere near what you need to do to balance the budget. In fact, again, remember, in this year the deficit was about $1 trillion. You could cut the entire defense budget. I don't mean just cut it back. I mean the entire Defense Department could go away. You still would have had a deficit. You could have taken a half of the other non-defense discretionary budget. So this is all the other departments, education department, which actually some of that you wouldn't miss. But you could take the half of this, make it entirely go away, you just barely balance the budget. So we are such a deep hole that there is, and when you look at this chart, the ticking time bombs here are, and I think I have it on the next slide. Yeah, if you go, and I'm sorry if you don't see this in the back, but I'll explain what it is. So if you look, again, we're about here, we're about 2/3 way through here. This looks at Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare, and interest, the growth, projected growth over the next 30 years. This red line is just about where tax revenues traditionally are. We're at about, we tax about 20% of the economy, somewhere between 18 and 20. And it's interesting how the American economy works, because if you actually increase tax rates, what happens is people stop that economic activity that results in the increased rate, and they pay less taxes. So, for instance, if you're a very productive person and they raise the marginal tax rate, you make the decision, well, gee, maybe I'll work a little less, earn a little less, spend more time with my family, do something else, and you end up paying about the same amount of tax. So they can raise the rates, but that's the way the economy works. Conversely, if you lower tax rates, you encourage economic growth, you encourage productivity and production, and revenue tends to remain constant. The economy grows, and revenue remains relatively constant, and then begins to grow. So revenues tend to be right at about 20% of the economy. Well, what this shows that in the year 2025, because the growth of Medicaid, mostly under the President's Affordable Care Act, Medicare, because of the number of people who are entering Medicare, by the way, 10,000 people a day enter Medicare in the United States, 10,000 people. Now, I was born in 1957. I am the peak of the baby boom. When I reach age 65 in 8 years, 13,000 people a day will be entering Medicare. 13,000 people. And remember, the largest Medicare expenditures are not when you enter it, it's in your last year of life, which statistically is about 20 years from when you enter it. Because statistically, if you reach age 65, now in the United States, you're probably going to live into your early 80s, on average. Some people longer, some people short, early 80s. So you have this, so we will call it a ticking fiscal time bomb going on, 10,000 people entering 20 years from now, and again, and that's accelerating, and 20 years from now is when, again, 40% of your expenses are in your last year of life. So this Medicare growth is dramatic. And the interest rate, if we don't control our spending, is the most dramatic growth. You don't even have enough money after 2025 to pay your interest, because I'm going to assume you're going to pay Social Security, you're going to pay Medicare, you're going to pay Medicaid, because these, again, if we don't plan to make changes, these are things we're going to have to pay. You won't even have enough money to pay your interest, much less, as you notice, the Defense Department isn't even on this slide. Unemployment insurance isn't on this slide. All the other federal departments, because literally within about 15 years, you run out of the ability to do anything else in the government except pay these things. We have to solve this problem. I mean, this is, it's just, and I'll skip over this. We just have to solve it. How does that work? Okay. Oh, I see. We're going to talk about 3 states, but this is not going to work here. All right, that means we're done. Okay. All right. What that was going to show was a frustration I had, and I'm sure Senator Brinkley has. You go to Annapolis, and you look at the 3 states we compete with. You look at Pennsylvania, you look at Virginia, you look at Maryland, you look at the per capita taxation, the per capita spending. We're about twice as high. We spend about twice as much money in our state government as we do in our surrounding jurisdictions. And then we wonder, because we need revenues, why we lose business to other jurisdictions, which is a big state problem. At the federal level, obviously, we have to remain competitive in order to not lose business to other nations. Right now, I will tell you, tax reform is a huge issue in Washington because we know that our corporate tax code is not competitive with the rest of the world. Our corporate tax rate, 35%, is the highest of all the what they call the OECD countries, which I will call the first world countries. We're the highest tax rate. So if you want to go and build a product somewhere in a first world country, and you want a reasonable workforce, you want all the things you get in a first world country, just right off the get-go, you might not choose the United States because we have the highest corporate tax rate. And of course, the most interesting thing is with the tax changes that were made by the president at the beginning of the year. If you're a pass-through entity, so that is you don't pay a corporate tax rate, but you pass it through in a subchapter S or an LLC or a sole proprietorship, you are actually going to pay a higher tax rate than the corporate tax rate, which is strange. I mean, how did we end up with a system where small business actually pays a higher tax rate than large businesses? So it's not right. We have to fix all that. Anyway, the reason why I show you these slides is because everything we do in Washington in the next 10 years is going to, I think you have to ask the question, what is its effect on the debt and the deficit long term? Those of you who read the Wall Street Journal today, big article on student loans. I mean, I tell you, the president's program on student loans, look, everybody wants someone to go to school. Everybody wants them to be able to afford an education. But his program will cost $300 billion over the next 10 years. Because what he proposes is that you actually forgive a fair number of student loans, that you continue to lend the money, but then you base repayment on someone's income, and then you forgive the loans after a certain amount of time if they've kept up with their payments. But we just honestly we just can't afford it. I'm reading this going, look, we have got to do something with programs like this. Every single program we come up with, we're going to have to ask the question: does this dig our hole deeper, or does it help us fill in the hole? And no matter how good a program sounds or what, we have to come up with the reality. You don't solve this problem. You look at what the effect is in Spain. Unemployment rate of 26% in Spain. Greece, unemployment rate, 16, 17%, huge deficits, huge borrowing costs. Those economies, honestly, are past the point of no return unless they get bailed out by another country, Germany and the EU. The only difference between us and them is we don't have another country that can bail us out. This is it. We're at the top of the food chain. When we go bad, there's nothing there. So this is a serious responsibility, and like I say, I think there's still some people in Washington who just don't face this reality. So anyway, that's what I have to say. I'm ready to, and I can stay for about a half an hour more, and I'm just ready to take any questions you have, any topic at all. I do medical questions too. And I don't charge. Yeah. Yeah.
I called Speaker Boehner and asked why we don't have hearings in the House on some of the corruption in the administration. Can you address why the Speaker didn't spend the whole summer on this president?
I don't. Look, the biggest thing on our plate right now appears to be, and there are a lot of things that go on in the administration that we're concerned about. But I will tell you, those of you who are following the whole Benghazi issue, this is becoming very troublesome. Because honestly, I didn't know what's going on because again, they weren't allowing people who were in the State Department, and we still haven't heard from the CIA operatives. Because what most people might not realize this. When they left the consulate, when that was taken over, and they went to the quote the annex. Well, the annex was the CIA base in Benghazi, much larger than the consulate, much more people than the consulate. In fact, I suspect what may come out of this is we may find out that the only reason, and some people have postulated, the only reason we had a consulate there was this kind of a front for having the annex, which was the real reason we were there was the CIA, and we haven't been able to question the CIA people who were on the site. That's very worrisome. In fact, we didn't find out until about a month ago that there were a number of severely injured CIA people there who were being kept from the public, actually in a separate floor in the Bethesda Naval Hospital, now Walter Reed, under guard, and where we now are beginning to have access to that. So we don't even know the full story. It's going to take a long time to roll it out, and because, again, on the surface, it looks like it was highly politicized at the time to cover up. And I'll tell you, we had a very good meeting with former Vice President Dick Cheney yesterday morning. He came over to the Hill, talked to a group of us, and gave us a very sobering outlook on foreign policy. We've been concentrating on the economy for the last 4 years, past 4 or 5 years, but the world has become a much more dangerous place in the last 5 years. I mean, you have North Korea, you have this the new head of North Korea, the son of the old tyrant, flexing his muscles, threatening to lob nuclear weapons, and the problem is he actually has them. I mean, if they had a delivery device, he would deliver them. They don't have a delivery device that can really reach large parts of the United States. Iran obviously is going full throttle ahead to develop a nuclear weapon, which will totally destabilize the Middle East. The president, drew the red line in Syria. If you use chemical weapons, well, bad things are going to happen. Well, I got to tell you, this is not a postulate they use chemical weapons. I mean, the British and French tested the blood of people who were killed and found the trace of the chemical weapons, the chemicals in their blood. So it's clear that chemical weapons have been used in Syria. Nothing's happened. To me, that's the most worrisome thing, because in the end, if we don't have security, nothing else matters. Nothing else matters. And it is one of the congressmen asked Dick Cheney point blank, look, what are the top 3 concerns you have in the world? Top 3 concerns. And he didn't say the economy. He said, number 1 concern is that you will have nuclear weapons by a terrorist regime who will deliver them as a dirty bomb somewhere in the United States. That's it. They'll take it and bring it in a suitcase. They'll bring it in the back of a truck. They'll bring it in a container going into a port, and they will cause, they will make, September 11th, as he said, look like a walk in the park, because literally the ability to kill hundreds of thousands of people. Because these are, again, as I said, Iran does not have North Korea doesn't have the ability to launch a nuclear weapon and, target it specifically because they don't have the delivery device. But they can put it in a, again, a large shipping container and bring it somewhere. And the effect is just as devastating. And again, as he said, you have to send clear signals that you will stop that at the point of origin. So in Iran, we cannot let Iran develop a nuclear weapon. That's the bottom line. This regime wants to destroy Western civilization, and they will. They tell us that. At some point you actually have to believe your enemies. And when they say, we really hate your way of life, we hate you, we hate your way of life, and we will destroy it. That's their goal. You have to believe that that's what they're going to do. And so he's right. It's a very, very dangerous world, much more dangerous than 5 years ago, and I don't think it's being treated that way. And I think that's what's so interesting about Benghazi. That's what it's a symptom of. It's a symptom of an administration that takes very lightly the threats around the world. Because that's in the end what it was. The testimony, those of you who heard the testimony 2 days ago, they repeatedly asked. They said, this is dangerous. This is, we need protection here in Libya, and repeatedly got turned down to the point where they were told, don't ask anymore. I got to tell you, that is either, you have to get to what is the basis of that? Is it you don't think you have enough money, or you just underestimate the risk in a very dangerous world? So it's going to go slow. We're going to try to hold their feet to the fire. It's a very reluctant, the administration is very, very reluctant to release any information. And whenever that happens, I always wonder why, because, I don't know, I'm suspicious. I think when they're that slow, there's something that's being hidden. Yes, ma'am.
You mentioned education kind of in passing.
Yes.
In the opening talk, and I was very interested in the financial things that you were talking about. I have two quick questions. One is, how did you get so educated about the financial part? Because you seem very, certain about the things that you were talking about. I'm just curious, as a citizen who became a congressman.
Sure. No, it's a great question. And, in terms of the education, it's always been interesting to me. I sat on the Education Committee for 12 years in the state Senate. Now we're on the other end, at the federal end, and we can get into a long discussion about the education, where it's going, some of the things that I think, the administration's doing that, again, I don't think see the forest for the trees. But with regards to the finances, I'll tell you why I got so knowledgeable about it. It's because the very first time, when I first got to Congress, I've only been there 2.5 years. When I first got there, I'd go into a town hall. People say, "Oh, what's the most, Dr. Harris, what's the most interesting thing, you found out, when you went to Congress?" And I said, "Look, it's not interesting. It's the most scary thing." When they showed me that slide of the debt, the historic debt, and the debt going into the future if we don't change our policy, any rational person looks at that and goes, "Okay, when are we going to start discussing the changes? When are we going to make them? When are we going to get that back on track?" And then you go down there and like, this discussion's not really happening. So, in order to show that slide, I said, okay, I've got to understand this. I've got to go back and delve into, what were the causes? Every time we had a little peak in the valley, what was the cause of it? The big peak, for instance, in the past 3 years was the fact that we had the stimulus bill 4 years ago, and then we never really dialed back some of that spending. In fact, some of the stimulus bill from 4 years ago is still unspent. They just released another few $1 billion of the other, and you go, this is crazy. We are, we're sitting on it this year, and again, I hate to use the word only with $800 billion in the sentence, but our deficit is only $800 billion this year, and they're jumping for joy in Washington. Now, I got to tell you, I remember when again, the last year I think of the Bush presidency, that, and again, this is in the midst of that recession. They're like, oh my gosh, it's going to be a $200 billion debt. And everybody rallied, oh my gosh, these are historically high debts. And all of a sudden, we got used to a debt near $1 trillion a year. Totally unaffordable. This is, and again, if you look forward and you figure, how can we solve this problem? There aren't a whole lot of ways you can solve the problem of a debt. In fact, if you look at the problem in Cyprus, which had the latest crisis, the reason why Cyprus couldn't solve its own problems is it didn't print its own money. It was a euro country, so it couldn't inflate its way out of the debt. If they could, everybody acknowledged that's what they would have done. They just would have inflated the value of the local currency, and that makes your debt go down. That's exactly what I'm afraid is going to happen in the United States. At some point, they're just going to say, you know what? We're just going to inflate our way. We're going to just inflate the currency out of the debt. Because, of course, let's say if the dollar was only worth half as much, your debt is only half as large in real dollars. So, and you and I think we both understand what happens when you try to inflate your way out of a debt, especially if you have people living on a fixed income, people who have a fixed retirement payment. All of a sudden, your retirement payment is worth half as much as it was in buying dollars. What that does to standard of living in the economy. We've just got to deal with it, and it's going to be tough because you look at that slide and you go, okay, let's talk about Medicare. What are we going to do? So we said, look, we understand the politics of it. People over age 65, we just have to leave alone. Probably people over age 60. We decided over age 55. But you know, if we dealt with the issue for people younger than 55, as I tell people, my oldest son is 29. He's an accountant. He's convinced he'll never see a dime of Medicare. He's looked at the numbers. He looks at those numbers. He goes, sorry, Medicare can't exist then. Because when you're going to decide between Medicare and the Defense Department, you know, you actually do have to have a Defense Department. So he understands that. So we have to do that. But we come under attack even when we say, okay, we're going to fix it, you know, for people who are in their 40s. We still come under attack with it. So that's why I show these slides. Americans have to understand the crisis we're in. We're going to make a move. I suggested that, you know, as part of this, we as part of the debt ceiling debate, which we're going to have in a couple of weeks or a couple of months in Washington, that we talk about capping Medicaid. Look, we need to deliver health care to the poor, but you can't afford to expand it. So I would propose we just freeze it where it is. That's it. If we freeze it where it is, let the states figure out how to best spend the money, but stop borrowing money when we don't have it. We just have to be looking at, and again, we have to look at the fastest growing programs and say, because look, we can't control the interest on the debt to a large extent, because the Fed artificially has lowered the rates, but we know the cost of that. The cost of that is future inflation. I mean, the Federal Reserve has added $3 trillion to the amount of currency in there. Their balance sheet is $3 trillion. And if in the end they can't what's called unwind that in a organized fashion, the entire currency will just be worth less because they just have to add it to the currency of the United States. I got to tell you, we have got to look into it, and we've got to make these changes. We should have made them 10 years ago. Yes, sir. Got it 3 in a row there. Go ahead.
The new health care law.
Yes.
Coming on board at the beginning of next year. Is there any movement in Congress to tweak that at all?
Sure.
Or make any changes to that?
Yeah, let me talk about the Affordable Care Act, because obviously it is going to be a huge issue for all Americans this fall. Because as we begin the implementation, the first thing that's going to happen is October 1st. In Maryland, we're kind of ahead of it, so we're going to have exchanges on October 1st. The problem is, as you know, if you read the paper, is that Blue Cross Blue Shield announced. Now remember, Blue Cross Blue Shield Care First is a nonprofit. So first of all, you know, the first thing people usually say, oh, you know, the insurance company's just making profits. Well, actually, Care First in this state, and due to actions of the legislature, 6 or 8 years ago, kept it as a nonprofit. You know, make sure that they're charging what they're supposed to. So they announced a 25% increase, average increase in the cost of a policy. So they're going to have policies on the exchange. They're going to be 25% more expensive than the policies last year, up to 150% for healthy young people. 150% increase in the cost for healthy young people. Now, I got to tell you, Americans are going to have sticker shock this fall, because they're going to go and they're going to look and see what these things cost. And so, on the one hand, these costs are going up. On the other hand, you have small employers small businesses still don't understand what the rules are going to be, because all the rules haven't been made. They still haven't announced what the small business benefits plan, minimum benefits plan has to be. So obviously the product can't be priced until the federal government tells you what that plan has to look like. And so you have this great deal of uncertainty among small businesses. So, from the provider point of view, look, we understand, we don't think long term, a lot of the providers don't think long term this is good policy, but on the short term it's not going to affect us because, people still going to have insurance. But who it will affect are the small businesses who still don't know what they're going to do with health insurance come January 1st. Because to be honest with you, if you're a small business person, and I've got to tell you, you have to say, I might just want to just pay the penalty and send my folks to the exchange. Because when you send them to the exchange, the way it's set up, the federal government will basically subsidize. Instead of you subsidizing the cost, the federal government's going to subsidize the cost. Well, you pay taxes. You might make the decision, I pay taxes I'll let the federal government subsidize my employees' health care benefit. And in an ideal world, if we had an ideal world, we don't. There is no utopia. In a utopian world, those exchange policies might actually give your employees a wider choice than you can offer in your company. Because most companies, especially small businesses, only have a very narrow group of options they offer their employees. You go to the exchange, you could pick from 15, 20 policies. You may like one better than another. You could pick from many more policies. So in an ideal world, that might not be a bad idea. But in the real world, it is going to be a bad idea because, for instance, right now, if you decided not to offer your employees insurance and you said, I'm just going to pay the penalty, they go to the individual exchange, that policy is now 25% more than it was last. They're going to have to go and buy individual policies, 25% more. It's a mess. The administration still doesn't admit it's a mess. They still come before Congress saying, no, yeah, there'll be a few bumps and, whatever the president used, glitches and bumps. I don't know what term he uses. My glitches and bumps means pain and suffering to me. I mean, it is going to be painful for Americans this fall to see what's going on. And in many states, they're not going to have a rollout because they're not going to have an exchange set up in time. I don't know what they're going to do. I don't know. Again, if this were handled the way other legislative ideas are handled, first of all, we would have had a huge bill, and the senator knows this. This is a 2,700-page bill. Senator Brinkley, what happens when we pass a big, broad bill and begin to implement it? Usually what happens the next year, you come back with corrections to the bill. You go, oh, you know what? We didn't think this through quite right. So and now we're beginning to think how we're going to implement it, so we've got to make these little changes. Right. So you actually have to do it over several years. You're absolutely right. So over the several years after you pass these bills, you would think that what you'd be doing is going in Washington and going, you know what? We didn't count on half the states not setting up that Medicaid, and this actually is going to put a big, huge expense on our exchanges, so maybe we got to go back and revisit it. Because of the politics of it, and again, look, we took 35 different votes on different aspects last year, nothing in the Senate. The Senate just said, nope, we're not going to make any changes to it. Well, I got to tell you, that's just bad legislative process. And when you start doing law like that and you start implementing a program like that, it is destined for failure. That's not the way it should be done. Even if you think that you should pass 2,700-page bills, you have to acknowledge there are going to be mistakes in it. There are going to be things you didn't count on, and in an ongoing fashion, you have to make these changes. And the Senate and President have just been unwilling to touch it, literally unwilling to touch the program. So we're sitting there going, look, we're willing to come to the table. If you want to reopen everything, we're willing to come to the table. But if you're going to forge ahead, and all they want, it's funny because they come back for $5 billion more to implement this thing. No input on, whether you think it's good, whether you think it can be reformed a little better, or whatever. Just give us $5 billion more dollars. And we just said no for the past 2 years. We said no. We're not going to. So the House was able to do that. We were able to not increase the funding for implementation that the administration wanted, and because I think the best thing for them to do is to have a rational discussion with Congress about whether this is going to whether it really needs to be changed fundamentally, and I'm afraid that's not going to happen. Yeah, let me take this one. Yes, sir.
My name is Ken Mercer.
Yeah, Ken.
Briefly, about Big Dodds Gate, I do have a question about that, and there's questions within it. I heard your commercial yesterday on CBN after the hearings, and I wanted to ask, what specifically are you doing in reference to that? I wanted to ask why we've not formed a committee that has subpoena powers. I personally believe that the American people have been deceived. I personally believe that there's been a dereliction of duty. I'm not sure that there's been a crime that was committed, unlike Watergate. So, in the end, what is going to be the final outcome?
Sure.
So why haven't we?
Yeah, let me tell you, my role, first of all, I'm not on a committee of jurisdiction, except I am on the Appropriations Committee, and I think something's going to come out in our State Department Appropriations bill that will deal with some of the issues that come out. But I'm not on what's called a committee. There are 5 committees of jurisdiction over it, obviously the Armed Forces, State Department, Homeland Security. I mean, they're Oversight, which had the hearing 2 days ago. With regards to what I can do, that's... I'm not on a committee except appropriations, where we will look, for instance, if the administration comes in and says, well, because they've already said this, well, the problem was funding. You wanted to cut back funding to the State Department. Well, yeah, okay, but we didn't say, the State Department doesn't pay the Marines who normally guard a consulate or guard an embassy. With regards to the second one, why not appoint a single committee with subpoena power? All those 5 committees have subpoena power. All of them have it. Every committee in Washington has subpoena power. And I know, because I've sat on a committee where we've had to subpoena administration officials. It just takes a simple majority vote of the committee. We control the majority on all the committees. Anytime we want to subpoena someone, we can. Now, subpoena is a pretty big step to take, but we're willing to take it. We've taken it for lesser things in the past. And for instance, I don't think you get Secretary of State Clinton, I don't think you get her back without a subpoena. I think she's not going to voluntarily come back. I don't think you get Susan Rice back without a subpoena. I don't think you get a lot of people potentially in front of those committees without a subpoena. In the end, there might be a special committee formed, but again, Mr. Boehner, Speaker Boehner, wants to let it go through the regular process with the committees. And I think what we're seeing now is we are look, that was a riveting hearing. I mean, it was. I have to tell you, and again, what's worrisome is that I think what you heard was that people on the ground said this is really dangerous, and someone in Washington said, we don't believe you. It's not. Libya's not dangerous. And the other thing we don't realize now, if Al Qaeda basically roams the streets openly in Libya now. I mean, what's happening in North Africa is the Muslim Brotherhood and Al Qaeda. The spread of it through all these countries that have had these. I mean, this is a kind of broken record now. What you get is these revolutions. They overthrow the regimes, and you have this period of uncertainty. And what pops up at the end is the Muslim Brotherhood and an Al Qaeda controlled group. And that's what's happening in country after country where we have hopes. Oh yeah, we have hopes this is going to happen. When Syria falls, I mean, Iran and Al Qaeda are ready to prop up a new regime there. When that falls, Jordan is next. Jordan is, again, it's just a series of dominoes, and it doesn't lead good places with it.
Congressman, what's the stop?
Commissioner, good to see you again.
Good to see you again.
Last time it was in Cambridge, on the other end of the district.
It's an honor to be with you again.
Yes.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for being here in Carroll County. What's to stop the House from simply defunding Obamacare? We control the House.
Sure. I get asked that all the time. We certainly could pass an appropriation bill that would eliminate. Well, actually, it's not that simple, because there are 2 different types of appropriations that go into funding Obamacare. One, when the original bill was passed, they did something very unusual. They actually forward appropriated money in the bill. This is very unusual. Normally, the convention in Congress is that you only appropriate for 1 year, and you leave to the next Congress or the next session, you leave the decisions to the next session. In other words, you don't tie the hands of a future Congress in deciding in a given year where the priority should be for spending. And that's because, unforeseen things can come up. So generally you don't forward appropriate. They forward appropriated about $100 billion over the next 10 years into the Affordable Care Act. So they created what's called the disease prevention, oh my gosh, I don't remember the name of the thing, some prevention slush fund. They should have just called it the slush fund, because it's a $5 billion a year fund, forward appropriated for 10 years. So when you forward appropriate, that means you can't just, you don't use the appropriation authority of the Constitution. It's done in a legislative bill. And this gets a little confusing, but there are 2 kinds of bills that go through Congress. One is what authorizes a program. It creates a program. And then, so they create a program. And it can be, we're going to create a program to fund, we think that there ought to be more blue chairs in the country. We're going to create the Blue Chair program. And we think the government ought to spend $100 million promoting blue chairs. So they pass it, they get it through both houses of Congress, and the president signs it. That's called an authorization bill. We are authorized to spend that money. The Appropriations Committee meets and says, that is a really silly idea. And that would be a total waste of money. So we're not going to fund it. So the program exists in the government, just has no funds. Okay, so that's the normal process. Normal process would have been, we pass Obamacare, Affordable Care Act, you can use whatever name you want. The president used Obamacare, so I use it. He uses it himself. So we pass the Affordable Care Act, and the next Congress comes in and says, you know what, this is really a bad idea, so we're not going to fund it. Normally, that's the way it should occur. What they did is they forward appropriated about $100 billion of it. So they didn't give the future Congress the option of saying this is a bad idea. They already built in the appropriations for 10 years. To change that appropriation, you have to pass another authorization bill. Authorization bills can originate in either house, but the bottom line is it has to go through both houses, get signed by the president. The president would never sign it. So that amount of money, and you don't even have the other thing people say, well, let's just defund it and go to a government shutdown. We basically say, look, we're going to shut down the government until this. You can't even do that with that $100 billion. So it was very cleverly done. It was done obviously with the knowledge that there could be a future Congress that doesn't like this. So it becomes very, very difficult. So what we are trying to do is the best we can do is we can kind of try to pluck out an important program from it, defund those things we can in a given year, and hope it survives through the Senate and the president's signature. We tried to do that a couple weeks ago. We actually came under some grief. That slush fund, we actually said we're going to take money from that slush fund because we knew that's what they're using for implementation, and to buy things, because they're basically going to states and everybody ought to know it. They're just going to states and just buying the states into these programs. They're making all kinds of promises out of this fund. If a governor doesn't think he wants a Medicaid expansion in the state, then a lot of governors have said we don't want to expand Medicaid. They've actually gone in and used that slush fund to provide other things to the state to convince them. I mean, it is a real, true slush fund. And we wanted to defund that to actually pay for patients in the high-risk pool or the pre-existing condition pool. And that's the one a couple weeks ago ran into a problem on the floor because some people said, no, that's actually helping Obamacare. What you're trying to do is make it better. No, actually, we were trying to take the money out of the slush fund. It's very complicated because the only leverage we have in the end to deappropriate something is to have a showdown with the Senate and the president. And the president is more than willing to say, you know what, it's okay, shut down the government, we'll see who wins that battle. We've kind of been to that. We lose that. We lose that battle. Americans don't like government shut down. They think we should solve these problems other ways in Washington. Realistically, we don't think we can. Again, this, from a policy point of view, this is done all wrong. I mean, and again, even just the unwillingness to negotiate reforms to that Affordable Care Act is just not the right way to do things legislatively. Yeah. Oh, yeah, we got time for at least one. Yeah, go ahead. I can stay till 9. I'll stay a couple minutes. If people want me to, I can stay. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
As a Marine retired sergeant major, it gives me a warm and fuzzy that you're a veteran.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think there's enough people in Congress who are veterans. Knowing how strong other countries are defensively, why do we always hear talk that our administration is going to downsize and cut back our military defense because other
Right.
countries will know this and then we're not a higher country?
Sure. No, it's a great question. Look, you and I have both been in the military. We both know there's some element that could be run a little more efficiently. We both know it. But it's not 50% of the budget. It's not 40% of the budget. It's not 30% of the budget. It's 5%, 10%? Yeah, maybe. The bottom line is I'm afraid that the administration doesn't realize how dangerous a world it is. I'm just being bluntly honest. I think they are naive about how dangerous the world is. And in fact, I was talking with Tom yesterday on the drive back from Washington. This is just like, and this is more or less what Dick Cheney says, just like before World War II. The world, there were people controlling large powers like Chamberlain in England, who was naive about the dangers posed in the world. And that naivete never leads to good things. Never leads to good things. And Mr. Cheney was right. I mean, you know, we should be, given the increase in danger in the world, we should actually be increasing our defense spending relative to the rest of the budget. Again, this morning's Wall Street Journal, a graph that shows that we are about to be at the lowest level in the last, oh my gosh, 80 years in the percent of our budget that goes to defense. And it's projected by 2021. Whereas, again, remember I told you in World War II, 90% of our budget was defense. Historically, in the past few years, it's usually been about 20% of our budget has been defense. It's going to be 10.8% in the year 2020 if current trends continue. I will tell you, I just think we're taking a big chance. We're taking a huge risk. And as the Vice President says, you know, it is a, you know, it's not, you're dealing now with true weapons of mass destruction, where our enemies have true weapons of mass destruction, and we have got to be vigilant against this, and that doesn't come free. That doesn't come free. And so I'm going to, bottom line is, I think the President wants to downsize the defense of the United States. And it's a complicated world. You know, it's interesting because on the one hand, the President really likes to brag when we do something right. But you know, the basis of being able, for instance, to fly that mission in to kill Osama bin Laden, the basis of that was a military that is the best equipped, best trained in the world. And when you lose that ability to be best equipped, best trained in the world, you will lose the ability to do that. And it's interesting, the President likes to take credit for that kind of thing, not realizing that's built on the shoulders. When I showed you that slide in the 1980s, you know, everybody realized the buildup in the 1980s, and this is what Dick Cheney said. He said when we went and began the buildup and won the first Gulf War, Dick Cheney called Mr. Reagan in California and said, thank you. The only reason we could do that, the only reason we could stop Saddam Hussein was that we had the buildup in the 1980s that allowed us to have the ability to go in and win that war with, I think we had 75 deaths in the theater of war. I mean, we won a war with 75 people getting killed. I used to joke, you know, I was recalled during the war. I went to Bethesda Naval Hospital. People say, oh, you had the safe duty. I said, honestly, it was more dangerous for someone in my age. We were such a good military. It was more dangerous for someone in my age to actually be in Washington, D.C. than it was to be in the theater of war. That's how good a military we had. And I got to tell you, since then, you know, President Clinton scaled down the military, and this is now, I'm afraid that this is now going to be an evisceration of the military. I mean, we will no longer have the best weapons. We will no longer have the best training. They've already said our pilots who should be flying 40 hours a month are going to be flying 15 hours a month. I mean, it's just, we're going to have problems in the end. And as he said, he was sitting around the table with Congressman, he says, you know, the issue is not next year. It's going to be 15 years from now. He says, look, one of you could be president of the United States. This is the military you're going to inherit, and you're going to have to defend the world with this military. And that's a problem. I share your concern with that. Now, one more question? Anybody?
What can we,
Yes.
as citizens and voters, do?
What can we as citizens and voters do? I think we really do have to have, and in general, look, I like representing the 1st Congressional District because it's a district generally of people who believe in I will say kind of traditional American values. You know, that if you work hard, you play by the rules, you get success, and that's a good thing doing that. We are gradually coming into a society where entitlements become expected. I mean, it's kind of expected that you really don't have to take care of yourself because the government's going to take care of you. And listen, it runs the gamut. I mean, literally, I will come in and, I don't know, do we have students here who are on student loans right now? Or have been on student loans? Look, that's you going to the government saying, you know what, I'm actually, you know, I'm going to depend on the government for this. And, you know, if we do things, you know, and look, everybody in Washington likes to give things. Look, I understand the coin of the realm in Washington. It was, get as many benefits as you can to as many people. In the day of earmarks, bring as much pork as you can into the district. All of this getting to a type of thinking that I think is bad for the country. We were built on individualism. Where the American dream was, you go out, you start a company, you start a business, you work hard, you make a future for yourself, and even more importantly for your children, for future generations. And we're wandering away from that, and it's very seductive, because everybody, and look, people would come to me, and the people are getting better now, and it's always they come to my office, well, we need you to do this for me, we need the federal government to do this for us. Federal government's flat broke. First of all, federal government's flat broke. We're not only broke, we're in hock. We are. If we were a business, we'd be bankrupt. In fact, I tell people, if accountants were doing that in a company, they'd be in jail. They literally would be in jail doing that. So very gradually, we have to go back to away from and kind of an entitlement mentality, where sure, the government always has to be there as a safety net. Always. Nobody's going to argue. The most conservative person in Washington is not going to argue that the safety net has to occur. But when you have a safety net, and for instance, you have a safety net and you don't have a work requirement, I think that's a mistake. I think that's actually not good for that person, to say, we're going to give you public housing, we're going to give you public benefits, we're going to give you fill in the blank, and you don't have to try to get a job or do training to work. I think we're not doing right by that person. I think we're not doing right by that person. And so that's the philosophy I think we need to get back to. We need to have a safety net, but we really do have to say that we have to get back to a country where work is honored, where it's respected, where it is it's expected of everyone. You pull your load. Sure, something happens, we'll take care of you temporarily while we help you get back into things. And ultimately that's what. So again, as I look at bills, does it help or hurt you? If we make I had this unemployment, Baltimore Sun sure wrote editorials about me against me about it, extending unemployment benefits for 99 weeks with no real requirement that you had to really look for work. And everybody knows someone's been on unemployment. Yeah, you kind of have to go, but no real requirement. If someone said, just make it simple, make someone go to the unemployment office one day a week, sit in front of a computer and search for jobs one day a week. Supervised environment. So we know that's what you're doing. When they did that, one state did that, 1/3 of the people left the unemployment rolls. 1/3. Because they weren't willing to come to the office one day a week and look for a job. And again, supervised. You have to sit there. So, it's not like, I said I was looking for a job and I got this piece of paper signed that I applied for a job. You actually had to sit there and do it. That's common sense. Ladies and gentlemen, that is just common sense. And that's what we have to bring back. So, still the greatest country in the world. We're going to keep it that way. Thank you very much.
Thank you all for showing up because it's late and people have to go to work. And the congressman has elsewhere. He has to go to work for a living, he says. Next month, we're going to have Patricia Goldberg, who's going to talk about homelessness in Carroll County. So that's something we're going to address. We go from one spectrum to the other. So thank you all for coming. God bless you all.